Welcome to Eating Enlightenment. I'm your host, Jared, and amazing conversation with Jodie, Gale. If you're wondering about the roots of healing an eating disorder, especially related to trauma, look no further, or at least let this episode guide you in giving you just a heartfelt, personal story from Jodie's time when she had an eating disorder and was so ready to just give up, she decided to swim with dolphins because dolphins were how she'd heard that dolphins were magical. And Jodie's since gone on to build a career out of helping people, women she holds trauma. She holds space for trauma, and she understands the complexities, the nuances, the depth. She's been through her own healing journey and has made a career, a living off of helping people with eating disorders and trauma. Her wisdom shines through in this episode. I've listened to it 2.5 times, and I just love it so much. We talk about the different layers of trauma, how all this stuff fits together, like putting all these pieces together is so tough, but Jodie does this amazing job of the image of a house with a foundation, the living space, and then the upper room, and understanding that analogy, the past, the present, and the future, how those three things fit together and help heal eating disorders. It's just so good. She puts everything together with stories, with her own tales, and speaks with authority. So I'm so thrilled to share this episode with you all. And if you are interested in getting on the email list, I send out emails a few times a week. And there's this fascinating study that I introduce people to my email list with. And it's the study where mice were addicted to cocaine, but they were locked in a dark cage. And then when they switched the cage, they gave the mice sunlight, and they gave them lots of friends to play with. They no longer were addicted to cocaine. And I want to start off, if you're interested in hearing from me, getting on my email list, I want to start off our conversation with this study, challenging your notions of addiction, basically. And really, I believe that addiction is about healing the underlying trauma, similar to the episode with Jodie. And this little PDF short book is at eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. You'll get a PDF describing the study with mice and addiction. And a few emails later, you'll get on my email list and you'll start hearing about from me. So that's at eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. You can just go get that right now. And without further ado, Jodie, Gale. You are coming from this deep place, and I'm just curious to see how this conversation unfolds.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And your soul journey, we'll get into some principles, but you had this story I was curious about. You had your own struggles, and then you went swimming and saw a wild dolphin, or you saw a dolphin. Like, what was that about?
Yeah, so I guess I'll share a little bit of my history. So I struggled with, really, when I look back, even at the age of 3 or 4, I remember staring in the fridge. I'd go from the fridge to the pantry, back to the fridge, back to the pantry, just opening the door and standing there staring in the fridge for something. So, and then at 5, by the time I got to school, I specifically remember this one incident where I would purposely stand next to the little fat person so that I didn't look fat. So, and then by the time sort of 8 years old, I wasn't really swimming in my own swimming pool without a T-shirt to cover up. So I'd had body image issues from, and that search for something from a very, very young age. And, looking back now, that's growing up in a family with a trauma history. And then my sort of parents divorced. And then by the time I was 13, I had bulimia right through till 27. So what what happened was I'd gone to live in London, and I was 23 when I moved to London from Sydney, and was very much part of the London original rave scene, and Summer of Love they called it, and I was pretty naughty there for most of those years, and I was working in a crystal shop in Covent Garden in Neal's Yard. It's all very hippie and mystic flight, and I had read a book, Swimming with Wild Dolphins, and in that book, I think there was two books I read. The one that I'm thinking of now is by Olivia de Bergerac, so I'm happy to send you the link for that for the show notes. But yeah, she said that swimming with wild dolphins is sweeter than chocolate or drugs. And when I read that, I was like, that's exactly what I'm using, chocolate and drugs. So I actually went out at lunchtime and booked a ticket to Ireland. I mean, I was pretty poor. I was only earning about £3 an hour or something, but I just knew I had to go and do this. And because it said in the book, people who swim with wild dolphins can heal everything.
Wow.
Basically. Well, there was just lots of examples of people who had that experience, and then they'd gone into recovery from addiction and stuff like that. So
you were working for dollars on the hour, and you saved up all your money to get to a plane ticket to swim with dolphins.
Yeah, and so it's just one dolphin. So his name is Fungi, and he's actually still alive. And I guess because he looks like a mushroom. But yeah, so I flew to Ireland and headed down south to a little fishing village called Dingle, and there was just something very spiritual about the place. I didn't really know that at the time because I was just in such a bad place, really. But the people there, so I stayed at a place called Ballintaggart, which was a hostel, and I met all these people on the first morning swimming, and they just said, oh my God, that place has cold showers. Like we're gonna pay for you to have a nice hot Airbnb. It wasn't Airbnb back then, but it was similar to that. And so these wonderful people put me up in this sort of bed and breakfast with this hot bath, and I think for me it was really, oh my God, people care. Someone cares.
Yeah.
And so we all headed down in the mornings to swim with Fungi. And I don't know if you know Maslow with his hierarchy of needs. But,
I love his pyramid.
Yeah, so he talks about peak experiences, and so I had what he would call a peak experience, and really it was the first time I'd ever felt. I just had that sense of inner knowingness, oceanic oneness. It was all very high, and it was like, okay, maybe I don't need to take drugs to get high. Maybe there's another way to do that. And for me, really, though, it was around, I'd heard that dolphins were telepathic. And that if this dolphin came near me, I mustn't be that bad after all. And he came near me and swam by me and looked me in the eye. And it was like, okay, maybe there's something good inside of me, because I guess like when you've got eating issues, you're just riddled with so much shame.
Yeah.
And so
it reminds me of, I went after I skipped college graduation and on my own went to this Zen monastery up in the mountains. There was no internet, and it was, I heard other people go up here to find enlightenment. Like maybe there's something up here for me, because there's nothing down there for me.
Yeah.
And there can be a magic in these places.
Absolutely.
There can be a magic where present.
Well, back in those days, there was no internet when I went. we didn't have to worry about internet back then.
It wasn't even something you were giving up at all.
No, there was just, even living in Dingle, I actually went and lived there after that. I spent 10 years swimming with Fungi and met, there was a group of people where we used to go all the time. And at Ballintaggart, there was a TV that we used to watch, and I used to watch one episode a week, and it was around the time when Ally McBeal was out. So I don't know what year that was, but that was about it.
I remember seeing her show at some point too. So, anyways, yeah, this inner knowing, this place within you, oceanic oneness. It's so difficult to believe in when you're in the midst of, an eating disorder, but any sort of trauma related behavior, whether that's drugs or whether that's different relationships or all these different manifestations of trauma. It's so difficult.
Well, we learn very early on not to trust our own bodies, and I mean, and I guess you could read about things like this, like in the dolphin book, but until you actually have that experience, it's kind of even hard to put words around, I think. But we're taught to override everything that we know. I mean, for someone to end up with an eating disorder, it's very severe. So you've learnt very early on not to listen to yourself, not to listen and trust others, because they're, typically my experience, 20 years working with women with eating disorders, is that there's always a trauma history. So
yeah, trauma can be I mean, just so, for a young child, young people's brains aren't developed. I know, just my own background. I didn't have explicit direct abuse, but you could say the opposite. This is an interesting thing I talked about recently with a friend of mine. But neglect is, neglect. Oftentimes we think of trauma as happening to you.
Yes.
And neglect is, it's another form of trauma, but it's the absence.
Absolutely.
So anyways, that can be difficult to process, any type of trauma, but yeah.
Well, actually, that's most. I don't. Do you know Dr. Jonas Webb? Her book, Childhood Emotional Neglect.
I haven't heard of this, but yeah.
Okay, very, very good book. So she talks about I think there's 8 or 10 different types of parenting systems, and some of those are very, very loving, but they just can't do feelings, like families where they say encouraging you to be great all the time, for example. It leaves no space to feel shit. So so she talks about, I don't remember them all off the top of my head right now, but then you've got the narcissistic parent, where it's all about the parent's feelings and needs, and the parent might be very loving, but it's all about them, and so the child is left feeling very unseen, very unheard. So in fact, I think childhood emotional neglect, I consider trauma, childhood abuse, and also childhood emotional neglect. So, but in my practice, most of them are childhood emotional neglect, not abuse, or there is abuse as well, but it's more of the neglect.
And either way, it's somehow our very primitive systems in our body that get in there. It's this this message that you're not good enough. You screwed up. Really, you screwed up somehow. At least there's probably different words and different phrases that other people resonate with. But something that's coming up for me is like, you screwed up, and there's this feeling that you screwed up, and I know too, like the research on children who go through divorce, whose parents divorce when it's young, under the age of 8, I believe, or at least this study that I'm thinking of, the children universally blame themselves, thinking, it's my fault.
Oh, absolutely.
So this trauma stuff, kids, their brain, we all just interpret it as our fault, basically. It's such a travesty.
Well, I think there's two sides to that. I was 8 when my parents divorced, so I'd love to get my hands on that research. But absolutely, you think it's your fault, but there's both. There's guilt and the shame. So I've done something wrong, and I am wrong. And when we're talking about eating disorders, we know that they are rife with both of these. Um, Aspects, that I'm to blame in some way, and I am wrong in some way.
Yeah, and all these forms of eating disorders. I mean, this is the core. Whether you're not eating, whether you're eating and just really really strict, whether you're
Well,
throwing
even
up or whatever, they're all
yeah, I mean, more and more, I even consider dieting to be disordered eating. I mean, it's just not. It is not a normal way of being with food. It's anytime you are restricting food groups or meals, or there's a tightness around it. It's not a natural relationship with food.
Yeah, that tightness. Do you think it like blocks out that shame a little bit, or like?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, well, it kind of does, but it doesn't really.
Yeah.
It does for a time, but then it especially, more and more we're seeing more sort of clean eating and orthorexia. I mean, I've been vegetarian and vegan for 30 years. So I've done a lot of self-exploration around that. But there is there's the healthy aspects of that around caring for the planet and caring for animals and all that kind of stuff. But there is a self-righteousness about it as well. And sometimes that's the only way we can feel good about ourselves, is to make ourselves better than. And I'm not saying that that's, please don't start emailing me about vegans start emailing me about that. I know that's not the only reason we become that, but there was a better, I know for me, I mean, I remember walking out of a restaurant, leaving my mother in a restaurant because she ordered veal. And back then I'm thinking, what are you doing? The way I'm eating is so much better than you. So that absolutely counteracts the shame until it doesn't.
Yeah, until it falls around you, and till you're trapped. Yeah, till something's.
Yeah, till you can't go out and eat with other people. I mean, back in those days, I was vegan in the 80s, probably giving away my age now, but it was impossible. I used to have to drive. It was probably a bit easier over there, but in Australia, we're so behind. I used to have to drive 40 minutes to the health food store where I could actually buy food. So the whole thing around it was just challenging and hard. My whole life was hard, even just by restricting the foods that I was.
Yeah, I feel how this how this can kind of what's the called counteract shame. That's not quite the right word.
Yeah,
how it can cover it up, or a mirror your if only I was like this all the time.
Yeah.
But that
exactly.
Yeah, but that shame creeps back in, and I think when people begin to really tap into this, to not even tap into it, just become aware that this isn't the right way to live, that usually there's some sort of mentor or therapy or other humans telling them, hey, this isn't normal. This isn't ideal. But I love these principles and these various concepts you wrote to me. And when someone starts to become open to a new way, there's this term I love that you say, non-pathologizing. I mean, yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
like so many times we think it's this, eating disorder, right? We say it's a disorder.
Oh,
Like,
I don't even like that term. I've
hmm,
started calling it a family disorder.
hmm,
So, which
hmm.
I get emails from people about, but I don't care.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, the word disorder in itself, I mean, and you'll see as we start to talk, it's I just find it very, very unhelpful. And, if we think about non-pathologizing, we need to look at what pathology actually is. And we think about the term psychopathology. So this is a term used in psychiatry and psychology and in the DSM. So for your listeners, the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistic. See, I don't even own one. Statistical
yeah,
manual.
yeah.
Um, I probably, I
So
guess I
there's,
should,
yeah,
own one,
you
but I
got
don't.
it. You got it.
Um, what psychopathology is the scientific study of mental disorders. And if you have an eating disorder, you would be, in Australia, we've got the Medicare system where you go to the doctor and they diagnose you. Or if you went to a psychiatrist, you would be classed with a mental disorder.
Mm,
And, so, I mean, from my perspective, whether I'm working with someone with chronic dieting, emotional eating, binge eating, and then, bulimia, anorexia, I don't see them as mental illnesses or mental disorders, rather a very creative way of dealing with early childhood trauma and emotional neglect. So exactly what we were starting to touch on before.
like, yeah, how someone in one example can feel a sense of esteem. We have this
Mm-hmm.
natural need, and it's on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this
Mm.
self-esteem, or depending on, and this idea of control, this idea of dieting, um, look a certain way can kind of. I love how you said that. Kind of, it can kind of give you that esteem for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what I often say to people is right intention, wrong intervention.
Huh.
You've got good intentions,
Hmm.
but you're intervening at the wrong level of the pyramid. So you're using food, which is at the physiological uh, bottom sort of thing, but you're actually looking for love, which is way up the pyramid. And that the food is never ever going to fill that need.
It's not.
And yeah, and so I'm thinking too about this. And what I find is when people are labeled with anything, and you get this a lot in the psychotherapy field, oh, I don't like working with borderlines or narcissists. And I mean, even those labels I find just so restrictive, and it really puts a glass ceiling on people's recovery. I mean, I get people even come and say, I know I'm a borderline. And I think, well, actually, you're a human being. And eating disorders get a bad, a lot of people sort of say, I don't like working with eating disorder clients. They're too stubborn. They're too this. And
Yeah.
I just think that's BS. And it's about working relationally with someone and seeing them as a whole person. It's that diagnosis puts and also there's a lot of stuff out that came out in Australia yesterday, actually. About them being genetic diseases and kind of full stop. And again, that's,
Mm.
I mean, that might be one little part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And, again, I would say it's the environment that pulls the trigger on those genes, if that even does have an impact. So,
Yeah, when people are able to, I remember, an insight that I had in therapy a long time ago, but it was I knew intellectually, logically, rationally that my parents loved me, but I never felt that in my
yeah,
heart. And so that little shift for me kind of started opening the doors, kind of started helping me realize like this isn't I didn't do this to myself. I feel like that's one of the biggest problems with the disorder is it's this kind of it puts sort of a blame
mm,
on the person who's struggling. Like you have this disorder. It's
hmm
basically your fault. for being disordered, and you are a person with an eating disorder.
Mm.
Um,
Well, even if it doesn't sort of say it's your fault, but that
mm.
what happens is that the child with the eating disorder gets pathologized. So everything starts to revolve around, something that drives me mad when I see articles and whatever about the impact that the eating disorder that this child and the eating disorder has had on the family. And I think,
Oh.
oh my God, I think this is a family disorder.
Mm.
That there's typically everyone in the family is sick in some way, and
Mm.
that's not about blaming parents. It's about saying
Yeah.
typically there's transgenerational trauma. So you've got
Mhm.
so or parents haven't learned how to emotionally regulate their child. And that's something, I'm thinking about the purpose of the eating disorder as well. It's, this is a very sort of creative way of helping regulate feelings, which I think we're going to come on to a bit later. But because this in the family, people don't know how to do this stuff. They're not taught how to regulate anxiety and depression and all those kind of things. So
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
I get notes from girls when they've been in rehab and, the psychiatric sort of clinic, and I just feel like screaming because
Mm.
there's no mention of any of this stuff. It's all around this disorder, and they start to feel, well, when you're told you've got a
Yeah.
disorder, they start to feel like what's the point of recovery if I'm always going to have this?
Yeah, it feels like the walls are closing in, sort of.
Yeah,
Sort of.
exactly.
But on the other hand, when you take this, like your other principle, holistic,
Hmm.
when you're taking, it's not just about the person, you're talking about the family even, and
Yeah.
expanding your really your awareness of who you are, whether it's family or even awareness of some of these emotions and feelings and so forth are, they're in the body. And this is something
Mm,
that I struggle with. This is one of my biggest struggles. Um, yeah, like, not my default is to uh, block out feelings with either substances or like
mm,
thought, like
mm,
thought. And
mm.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so
So,
yeah.
well, and I think, I mean, that's quite normal.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
we have a really good meditation and psychosynthesis. So I'm a psychosynthesis psychotherapist, which is psychospiritual. And Asa Jolie was one of the first people to do a body, feelings, mind meditation. But I can send that through for the show notes for you if your listeners want
Sure.
to take a listen to that. So, but we when we think holistically, and this is typically anyone who goes for eating disorder treatment, certainly here in Australia, it is rarely holistic. And you're right, I didn't write that to you earlier, but we're talking about, when we're talking about holistic, we're also talking about a systems approach. And we need to take into consideration the whole person, so body, feelings, mind and soul. And the medical approach, which most people would come into contact with, is, so if you went to the GP or the doctor for your eating issue, it's typically working with mind, thoughts, and behaviors. There's not a lot of
Mm.
mention of spirituality in there, that's for sure. Um, but but what it also means, and this might be a little bit technical for people, so I'll try and explain it in lay terms. But when we look at the in psychospiritual psychotherapy, when we look at this whole psyche, we're looking at three different levels. So we're looking at our lower unconscious, which is okay. You sort of get get an image of a house with a basement. So the basement is the lower unconscious. The ground floor is the middle unconscious and the here and now. And the loft would be the higher self, or the transpersonal, or the higher unconscious. So in the loft, it's always holding the potential for more,
Mm.
and in the basement, you're working with history. So what we're doing is we're dipping in and out of people's history. We're working in the here and now, especially as a depth psychotherapist. I bring, how are we doing in the room, and the potential that is always laying there inherent within. So I'm always holding that there is
Mm.
something more for this person, not you have a disorder and we're going to have to help you manage it for life. I mean, that is just
Yeah.
so depressing,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
like taking, I guess, just keeping someone in the basement, sort of, or
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's probably not even like, I just think about the tools and the different, not even mindsets and heart sets
Mm-hmm.
and heart, uh, learning to come from my heart more. Um, I feel like these, and as well as the incredible, um, understanding family patterns at a
Mm-hmm.
deep level is useful. It's very useful. Not to disregard the basement, or not to only focus on these lofty things, but yeah, when we have all three kind of held together by the present moment, sort of, it
Mm,
really is a, I mean, effective for sure, or more effective, but rich and
mm.
more comprehensive way of treating these.
Oh,
Not even treating,
absolutely.
just moving on and growing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, for me, I was trained, although it's psycho-spiritual, I was trained by a psychoanalyst. So we certainly spend quite a significant amount of time looking in the basement, you know. But that's not all there is. You know, we also need to work relationally, and this is for anyone, even if they're doing self-healing, you know, they don't even have to have a therapist, but to dip in and out of these. And also, I didn't mention, but we also talk about the collective unconscious as well, you
Mm,
know, Jung's
mm.
collective
Oh
unconscious.
yeah.
So there's that as well. But um yeah, you know, and to, again, to look at the whole story, you know, not just part of the story. And that's, you know, I think there's nothing worse than someone already suffering, and then kind of, they might not be told they're the problem, but that's certainly how they begin to feel within this eating disorder industry. And even if we don't go to eating disorder industry, even if we talk about the diet industry, so if you get someone fat, for example, who goes to the doctor,
Mm.
um, you know, the first thing they're told is there's something wrong with you. Your body's obese. They don't even say your body's obese. They say you're obese.
Yeah.
And you might be there, especially for women. You might be going for a Pap smear, and all of a sudden you come out with a diet.
Ugh,
You know,
yeah.
without any kind of whole picture view.
Mm. Yeah. Totally. Totally. Just put upon you. Totally.
Mm,
You didn't.
mm.
Not even welcomed, or um. Yeah.
Well, you're not seen as a human being.
Mm.
You know, you're either seen as a body or an eating issue, or,
Mm.
you know. And I know,
Mm.
certainly, being in an overweight body, I mean, when I used to go to the doctor
Mm.
when I had bulimia, I was very slim. You know, I was sort of, you know, 20s, whatever. No one ever asked about any of these food issues. Yet you go and the same thing happens though when you go in a sort of fat body or a bigger body.
Mm.
All they do is say lose weight. They don't actually say, hey, what's going on for you? Are you using
Mm.
food? And I'm not saying everyone in a big body does use food, so don't
Sure.
hear
Sure.
that, please, because
Yeah. Yeah.
some people, you know, we're talking about health at every size, and some people, lots of people, don't have food issues. But if
Mm.
someone does, they often get missed
Mm.
because we're not looking at the whole person.
Yeah. And for you, how would you describe food? Some people say food, there's so many different words. People use food. Sometimes food is their only friend.
Hmm.
Sometimes food is a prop to feel better. With bulimia, how would you describe that relationship back then?
All of those things that you've just mentioned. I mean, I
Mm.
remember thinking, um, you know, that food was my best friend. And, but, you know, what we're actually talking about is, with anorexia, binge eating, and bulimia, and all those other, clean eating, chronic dieting, all those other sort of disordered eatings. Um, they often mirror our early attachment patterns. So
Yeah.
how relationships were done to us, how we do relationships
Huh.
is typically how we do food.
Huh.
So
Ah.
bulimia is utter chaos. And if I look back to my early life, it was chaotic. was completely chaotic. And typically with anorexia, people are very avoidant and it's very restrictive. And so I often think, I wonder how love or acceptance or whatever was restricted with you. Binge eating tends to be on the codependency sort of side, where always wanting more, more, more. There was never enough.
Yeah.
All of these disorders, there was never enough of something.
Yeah. I feel that. Yeah. Not enough. You said it, love in that way.
And not just love, one of the things that drives me mad,
I know.
we see eating disorders are not about attention, and I do not mean to they're in no way pathologizing the sufferer, but they absolutely are. They are about somewhere I was not seen and heard in my true self, and this is the only way I can be seen. And it's I don't know what else to say.
I love
about that,
like you wrote one thing about, literally you wrote, how to like if your neck or something, if you had a pain in your body or tightness or this sometimes this, when we are more clear and calm, we can feel this deprivation, this hole in our heart. And this literally you asking your body, like the body's voice that wasn't heard back then, what do you need right now?
And when we were talking earlier before we started, I was in North Carolina early this year with they called embodied recovery, and I've been doing a lot of somatic work, but they are very much, we need to bring the body into eating disorder treatment. So I think you asked me this around a term that I used on my website, forward thinking, and how I view any symptom, regardless of whether it's anxiety, depression, eating issues, shopping, whatever it is, that they all carry value, meaning, and purpose. So rather than viewing, say, emotional binge eating as a problem, we look at it and we ask, what's this symptom calling for me to awaken to? So, and I think you were sort of talking about, in the body, if I'm sitting there and I'm having feelings in the tummy, for example, if I check in with my tummy and ask, what are you calling for? And it might say, for someone who's been restricting, it might say food, but it might also be, typically around the stomach area, it's the solar plexus, and it has to do with mothering. So it might be calling for, I need you to take better care of me, or and so what these symptoms do is they call us into our potential. So they I'll give you some other examples. So
no, this is, I love this. Like, this is, yes.
Yeah. So is it to pay attention to my feelings? Is it, do I need to learn how to regulate my feelings? Am I in need of soothing right now? And very, very big one, especially because most of eating issues sort of really crank up in teenage years. Is this an attempt to separate and individuate, so become my own person in the family? Is my big body the only way I can hide and protect myself or take up space in the world? Is my anorexic body the only way I can hide and not take up space? And we talked earlier, clean eating. Is it the only way I can feel good enough or better than? Am I squashing down my creativity, pleasure, or sexuality with food? And anger is another big one. I've never met someone with an eating issue who wasn't raging inside. Very angry about
boundaries being violated.
Everything.
Everything. Their sense of self being disrupted and intruded upon, without, like, just that thing you mentioned to the doctor. Like, that's someone impressing or something, or forcing their opinion on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically.
And actually, and typically it's people in bigger bodies, and
Yeah.
so they already feel shame, and then they go to the doctor and then they're shamed again. It's very, very sad.
Yeah. And I think this kind of the things you just were mentioning earlier, I said this catch-all blanket phrase, quote unquote, love. And it's sometimes I kind of
Mm-hmm.
let out a sigh, like, what does that even mean? Like, like it's can be so, you know, imprecise, but like there's so many different aspects of love. Like, I feel like all the things you just listed, from like, was I not seen? Is this how I'm hiding? Is this how I'm soothing? Is this
Mm,
my need for get back control because I wasn't being heard? Is this like, am I trapped in my head thinking, which kind of come up for me, is this a release from thinking? Is this like,
yeah.
these are all like the various ways love, you know, manifests, and how we actually, you know, love ourselves in this whole
Mm,
way from all these different things. It's love is a tough word to describe, but you're right. Like, learning, like, it's a calling, right? Like it's calling you to to
to
to
wake up.
to wake up, yeah, to awaken to
Yeah.
the real meaning of love, so to speak. I
Yeah,
guess, yeah.
absolutely. And again, it's sort of hard because it all starts to sound a bit woo woo.
Yeah, I know it does. I know it
um,
does.
and I remember, when you're
Oh
feeling
my
stuck, if
gosh.
someone says you just need to love yourself, I mean,
Oh, I know.
we
That's like
read
the
that all.
worst thing. Yeah. Oh.
I mean, but it's true. You know, it is actually true, and but that's a process to get there. It's
Mm,
not something you read in a self-help book and then, oh yeah, I'm going to love myself. I mean, if it was that easy, we'd all be doing it.
mhm.
But love is an action too, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, when we get to talking about soul and stuff. So
Yeah, I feel like the love is the language of the soul, as they say, you know.
yeah, there was something I just wanted to come back to before we
Sure.
move on to soul, because I think this is really, really important. And you started to talk about the pain in the neck, and
Mm,
I kind of wrote to you. It's about what are you screaming for? When you've got these really bad sort of pains in the body. But
yeah.
one of the other things that underlies eating issues is often, well, not one thing, but two. And we're talking about when we go outside the window of tolerance and we go into hypoarousal, which is this is very simplistic view, depression, and then we go into the hyperarousal, which is anxiety. And
Mm,
a lot of people, they say, I want to get rid of these parts of me. I don't like being depressed. And one of the really, really important things for me is that instead of rejecting these parts, we welcome them in, and
mm,
so that depression is it's also calling for something. So
yeah.
what I do with people is I will be sitting in the chairs and I'll go, who's there? And outside the door it says depression. And then I say to the client, what would you say to
Mm,
depression? And they're like, go away. I
mm,
don't want you here. And I'm like, how
mm,
how do you think depression might feel?
mm.
Oh my God. And then they have this realization, oh my God, even worse. Exactly. So
Abandoned.
how about we welcome depression in, and then I start to take care of it, and I say, would you like a cup of tea? Would you like a warm blanket or a hot water bottle, or
Mm,
whatever it is?
mm.
And then the depression starts to feel cared for.
Yeah.
And then it can have its voice and tell us what it is calling for. So then I work with the client and say, if she could speak whatever she doesn't have to be positive here. She doesn't have to be perfect here. She can actually be, I've done visualizations with people where we've gone into some really, really dark, dark places.
Mm.
And, for me, it's allowing that depression to tell us what it needs, and that then we can
Yes.
realize the quality that it's that it's sort of suffering with, but also trying to express. So people who have had depression are really, really compassionate people,
Oh,
because they know how bad it feels.
yeah. I love what you're saying. This right here, there's so many different aspects of healing and transformation. And I feel like this was like the most important thing, like that invitation
Yeah.
to, and that dialogue with those unwanted, aspects of yourself, and seeing how people repel, right? Like shame, how, like, or depression, get that, I don't want you, get out of here. But then that developing that relationship with that part of you, that there's something, I don't know,
Well, it's
timeless or
really,
whatever, or something. It's just so, this is like the core. This is one of the core
it is.
things. Yeah.
And actually, if I go back to my own treatment with I had a wonderful, wonderful therapist who and when we're talking about love in therapy, if if you don't feel loved by your therapist, then you need a new therapist. Like, because when I think about therapy, I felt so, so loved by my therapist. And one of the things she actually taught me all this is that she took me down into the basement in a visualization, and I could see this very anorectic. I wasn't anorectic at the time. I was actually suffering with bulimia, but there was this very anorectic, scared person living down there. And I said, no way, I'm not going back down there. That person's like sick, you know.
Yeah.
And she said to me, look, let's come back up, and how about we leave the basement door open? And then from the week to week, this part of myself that was completely split off and completely anorexic eventually worked its way up and was sitting on the step one day to the kitchen, and it was like, oh, okay, I see you. And really started to build a relationship with that part, and then eventually she ended up at the dining table and she started to eat.
And it took some time for her to get
It
to that top
did.
stair. And
It did.
yeah.
Because, well, these parts of us that are terrified, they've had to go into hiding for a very good reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when she sits at the table, when she's at the table, I guess that's kind of when we find something that we really care about in life.
Absolutely.
That's like what we really find, something deep within us that is, our truth, or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, well, we were starting to talk about soul, and one of the things that I always say is that most people with eating issues, even if it's just yo-yo dieting, we're spiritually bankrupt. We don't have that sort of there's not much good in life, and so what I sort of say is that we need to begin to view ourselves with what we call bifocal vision. And so we're thinking about two levels. We're thinking about, we have an ego and a personality, and then we also have a soul. And one of the first things I say to people in that very first session is that at the core, regardless of what we've been through in life, we are whole and unbroken, and our work is to begin to tend to and take care of the soul. So, I mean, if we go back to this imagery, regardless of whether I liked this aspect of myself or not, this is still it's still part of who I am, and it needs sort of taking care of. So we talk about this. I'm a Carolyn Costin eating disorder coach as well, and she really talks a lot about this. She calls it the soul self. And so we talk about the eating disorder self and the healthy self or soul self. And she says the one that we feed is the one that's going to get stronger. So, to feed the soul, I guess we need to focus on our inner world rather than superficiality. And this is so important in, I mean, I don't know how old you are. You look a lot younger than me. So we were talking earlier, you've kind of grown up with the internet and stuff, but I know a time before Instagram, before Facebook, before TikTok. And, this superficiality that happens on these platforms is really, really dangerous, in my opinion. And instead of something, I interviewed Carolyn recently for my own podcast, but she says, put the phone down and go out and look at a rainbow. you know.
Mm.
And what she does with clients
Mm.
is she takes them out to see the moon.
Mm.
And then wherever the client is in the world, they can look at the moon and have that connection with her. And it's what we call in psychology a transitional object.
Mm. Oh.
So yeah, so it's helping you stay connected to that person,
Mm. Mm.
even when they're not there.
Mm.
You know, so we're talking about attachment theory when we start talking about that. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess we're talking about living a soulful life, and you know, it could be through music, spending time in nature more and more. I just feel like if you were to do the same walk every day through the seasons,
Mm.
you just get a much better appreciation for things
Mm.
come and then they go, and then they come and then they go. Um, you know, it could be swimming in the sea, or like me, swimming with a wild dolphin, or some people, you know, who go snowboarding, standing on the top of a mountain. In Australia, for Aboriginal people, we talk about connecting with country or the
Mm.
land, admiring a moon or a sunset, and getting in touch with creativity through art and journaling and so forth.
Yeah, as I just what comes up for me this connecting, you know, the spirituality aspect of this whole thing. But back in the monastery, right? Well, what comes to mind for me is Buddhism. I mean,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
so that's my lens, so to speak. But you know, this notion that original wholeness, nirvana, is something that each of us are born
Mm.
within. And it's kind of it might be obscured by, you know, there's this image of a lotus, a white lotus in dark muddy water, and this lotus is maybe covered with mud, but actually the mud kind of forms the nutrients for the lotus to blossom forth
Exactly.
into the light. And you know, that seed is always there.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of leads into our next part around what I, you know, transformation and growth, and what I call, well, not just I, but people from a transpersonal view, call post-traumatic growth. And it's interesting because Jolie, the founder of psychosyntheses, he was actually Jewish, and but he was really one of the first. So he was a colleague of Freud and Jung, and he split off from them because he felt that he was more aligned with Jung in the end. But he sort of split off from Freud because Freud only worked with the basement back then, and Jolie really felt that there were, you know, and spirituality was actually more religion, and it was pathologized. And so he really brought a lot of his Jewish sort of spirituality into the therapy, and then he started bringing in lots of different spiritual sort of disciplines. But you know, we talk about one of the big things in psychosyntheses is spiritual crisis and spiritual awakening. And from my perspective, an eating disorder is a psycho-spiritual crisis, and that's the bottom line sort of for me. You could say actually, you know, you could add into that, so like a soma, psycho-spiritual cultural crisis. It's you know, if we're going back to the whole story, and so we talk about that there's been a spiritual crisis, and that we don't, you know, in some sort of spiritual sort of communities you'll see on Facebook and Instagram around like the law of attraction, for example. We don't really see it like that. We don't purposely cause crises, but with them usually comes a great awakening. And it's really about how we transform our pain and suffering into something of value, meaning, and purpose. So if I look at my own life, I think, you know, I've had such a wonderful career. You know, I couldn't do this work at the level that I do if I hadn't suffered myself.
Yeah.
And you know, I get to sit with these really, really, really amazing women who don't know how amazing they are.
Mm.
And I hold them, and I hold that hope for
Mm.
them until they are ready to step into that. And I'll hold that for years. I don't care. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, you
Mm.
can't love a client like that if you, haven't experienced that yourself. So therapists having their own therapy, but that if you haven't suffered, and I'm sure there are great therapists out there who haven't suffered, but I just know myself, when I found my therapist, the fact that she'd recovered herself was like, I know that you know how bad this feels. Yeah.
Yeah. Who was that Jewish counselor? Or the Jewish therapist?
So Roberto Saggioli. Yeah, so he's Italian, and this is really, if you love, we're talking about the house, the basement.
I'm exploring more of my I'm half Jewish, so I've been exploring, more of that side of me, that cultural side of me. And
you will love this model. He's
that's what I'm thinking of.
Are you anywhere near? I don't know if I'm saying this right. Palo Alto.
The Oshman Center, and
okay. Well, there's an institute there that teaches psychosyntheses. So I know, because I've come across it again and again and again.
Interesting.
But I'll send you some resources as well. But so he what was I going to say about that? Saggioli. He was Italian Jewish, and so one of the big things that we learn. So psychosynthesis training took me about 8 years. So it's like a classic, like a Jungian sort of training. Yeah. But he was very much into Dante's Divine Comedy.
Oh, really?
So we kind of see that is the perfect companion to psychosynthesis, because you go down into hell, and you have to have a guide.
There's like 7 circles in hell too.
Exactly. And then you come up to purgatory, and then paradiso, which of course is the basement, the ground, and the loft.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. It's most schools in psychosynthesis, we spent a whole year studying Dante. So so I guess what we're saying is we're like Dante's Divine Comedy, you end up in paradiso, and you're awakening to the more than, and to a spiritual life, and very, very much living aligned with soul rather than ego. And it's not about getting rid of the ego. We need an ego. But
I want to share this. I feel like this just rings with me. This really rings with me. I feel like it's such a useful thing to, in the right time and place, to tell someone, or at least to, hey, Dante's story, like you got to go through hell first, but there is paradise. There is a spiritual higher sort of space that is you can lean into.
And if you look at the Divine Comedy, it's too far for me to reach because I've got headphones on, but I think like the first line is, midway along my life I found myself at a crossroads, or I can't remember the exact wording, and this is really for someone who is looking for recovery. You've got a choice. You either choose to go down into the hell with a guide, if that's appropriate for you, or if you can afford to do that, or you don't. And who knows where the other path's going to go. I mean, for me, I chose to go into hell and to go into doing the deep work and all that kind of stuff. I just want to say, I want to come back to something though, because it's really important, because I think I just want to touch on spiritual bypassing. And when we talk, as a spiritual psychotherapist, I get a lot of people come who just want to go straight to paradiso. And that's a defense typically, and it's just as unhealthy as avoiding sort of the basement and the painful feelings. And we need to be really, really careful to I guess
when
do
I
the
joined the monastery
work.
Yeah, when I joined the monastery, it was great in many ways. I think just the regular eating, having nutritious meals regularly fed really helped me out physically. Like that was huge in hindsight. And community and meditation and some psychological tools and so forth, compassion, very good. But I was definitely spiritually bypassing. It wasn't until the monastery got me into therapy, Like it got me motivated to go back to school to become a counselor because there were a bunch of counselors up there.
Yeah.
But that's when I started, but I clearly see that it was like, I want to be enlightened. Like,
yeah.
And you're right. That it just doesn't work that way.
Well, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's, what happens is when we don't feel enlightened, again, there becomes this search for something outside of ourselves, and if you don't do the inner work, it's hard to actualize the spiritual qualities in the here and now, or in relationships and whatever else. And actually a lot of people, if you look at, you only have to look to Instagram for this, and the spiritual, you can easily slip into spiritual narcissism then, where you get a lot of sort of gurus, follow me, all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, I feel it. Jodie, I'll say this in the intro as well, but where can people reach you? You have your own podcast, and I'm so touched by your message today, and I'm going to re-listen to this. I just feel like there's so much for me personally to absorb, and you just are a wealth of knowledge. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at jodiegale.com. So that's for my therapy practice, but I don't work with US citizens because of your whole litigation sort of things. We don't, they won't cover us here for working with US citizens. But actually, look, my practice has actually been full for about 8 years. And so that's why I've started the podcast now. I'm sort of moving into some online offerings, which I haven't devised yet, but they will be coming. So the best place really nowadays, I think, is the Soul Centre, and we spell centre CENTRE .online. So the Soul Centre.online. And as you said, I've got a podcast, and so I've got therapists guest posting with really this is aimed, the eating disorder field, for whatever reason, hasn't really focused on trauma. And so for me, this is really for women who have experienced early childhood trauma or emotional neglect, eating issues, and what Tara Brach calls the trance of unworthiness. So just feeling, that low self-worth and shame. So I really want to speak to those people, because to be honest, I was pissed off that for the last 20 years at not being seen. So I see you.
Yeah, I feel it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn off the recording. One sec. All right. Namaste, everyone. Carry some of this message with you today. Apply it, live it, breathe it. Go forward with peace. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so grateful for you. I'd love to continue this conversation. I send out emails. It's my primary way of communicating with this little tribe at Eating Enlightenment. And you can get on the email list at eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. That's eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. If you want to continue this little discussion with me and hear from me and be inspired by me, join that email list. If you go to eatingenlightenment.com/podcast, there's this fascinating study about food addiction. And I want to start off this little dialogue with you, this little email conversation. I want to start off by challenging you about addiction, what addiction is. This study, I think, is just so simple to understand, and it'll challenge your notions of addiction, really. It's the story of mice that are sad and isolated and alone and addicted, to their transformation by simply changing their environment. And it's just going to be eye-opening. And hopefully we can start this eating enlightenment journey together with an eye-opening experience, because that's what enlightenment is. It's opening your eyes. There's truth right in front of you. There's truth in you. Sometimes we get in our own way, and hopefully these emails, this little study, can just be a little ray of sunshine, and then we can continue getting to know each other over email, so to speak. Yeah. That sounds really weird, getting to know each other over email. But no, seriously, this is the way I communicate with people. So get on my email list. Let's chat. Let's engage. What comes up for you? I want to hear it. I want to know. I want to know your thoughts. The stuff about eating, it's not a simple fix. It requires connection. And shit, you've listened to me ranting and rambling right now. So there's some sort of connection right here. I know you feel it. So, eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. eatingenlightenment.com/podcast. Namaste.